Welcome to the Clinical Research Podcast. Every month we bring you the latest developments in research explained by our world-leading clinicians, academics and scientists based in Nottingham. Research teams at Nottingham University Hospitals have recruited more than 600 patients into Recovery, the world's biggest clinical trial in hospitalised patients with Covid-19. As a result, they've contributed to the UK's efforts to find effective life-saving treatments. However, the Recovery trial has thrown up a number of questions from our clinical staff who were dealing with the unprecedented pandemic on the wards of Nottingham's NHS hospitals. For our latest research podcast, Andrew Bennett spoke to clinical research managers Lindsay Crate and Rebecca Bolton, as well as senior research nurse Jack Squires, all from the core COVID research team. They talk about the latest drug arms being used in the Recovery trial, how ward staff can support the vital research at NUH, and what research and innovation can do to help clinicians. You'll hear Lindsay first, followed by Jack, and then Rebecca.
There's so many changes so quickly that one day it could be one thing and the landscape will have changed for the next day. So it's ever evolving, and that's very, very difficult to keep on top of.
That's absolutely, and that's just as difficult, I think, for the clinical staff that are doing the study as it is for the clinicians out on the wards who we are interacting with to try and get the study implemented for patients as well, isn't it? Often the main question a doctor asks of me is, so what's on the study now? Because last I heard there was, I don't know, aspirin or tocilizumab, but we're not doing that anymore. And it's those sorts of questions, isn't it, where people are aware that the study's going on and they've obviously had something to do with it in the past. But unless they're interacting with us all the time, it's hard for they sort of have to trust us to give them the information, which is quite a big ask sometimes.
Yeah, I think they have so many other things going off as well that recovery sometimes gets pushed to the back of their mind a little bit. So until they see somebody appear in red, then they suddenly think, oh, recovery.
So how are they feeling about it, guys? Probably particularly at the coalface. How are the sort of non-R&I people feeling about recovery?
I think it's a burden for some and an impact on clinical priorities.
I've had mixed reviews when I've seen clinicians. Some think it's great. They just want us to tell them what they need to do. And then, like you say, others just see it as a burden and haven't got time to talk to you, haven't got time for you to explain.
That's interesting that you say that, because maybe I've just been lucky. I haven't come across too much negativity when I've been out and about. I know we get reports from nursing staff quite a lot when there have been problems. I think on the whole, particularly if you bump into the senior team, consultants on the respiratory wards, they're extremely positive and very key. It's very clued into what's going on. And will often sort of, to the extent that they'll say, oh, this patient can have this, this and this, and they've already done the hard work for you sometimes.
That could be just because you're on the respiratory wards. I think if you're not on a respiratory ward, I think that could possibly be the difference.
I think you're right. And it depends who's on. And I know a lot, because of the way the wards have all been moved around, the different patient groups have ended up in all sorts of different places around the hospital. It really depends who's covering those wards in those days. But on the whole, people have been very happy to interact with us, I think. And it's been getting generally better as we've got more confident with the studies, I think. I think when we didn't always have the information to hand and they didn't want to invest a lot of time in it, that seems to have been the main problem. If you've got it all there and it's very quick and easy for them to understand, that's where it's been most successful, I think, hasn't it?
I think it's important to note as well that the trial to date has shown that they've found some really good treatments to help treat patients with COVID-19, from dexamethasone, which was the one that was found early last year, to most recently, it came out last week about how successful tocilizumab is. So
I think that'll really help.
I think because it's quite a high-profile trial as well. It is mentioned in all the Downing Street briefings.
Clinicians like to sort of second guess it a little. You get a bit of a feeling as we start and stop these different arms of which ones the doctors are liking, which ones they think are doing well. And there's a lot of as you know, there's a lot of talk amongst clinicians. They all go to different meetings around these areas, and they are getting information back about how successful these drugs are. And you do get the feeling their confidence isn't great in some drugs, and other drugs that they feel very strongly that their patients will need. So it's hard to separate sometimes the researchy bit out from that information that the doctors have and already know which ones are most likely to do their patients benefit. That can be difficult sometimes to get across.
Can we talk a bit about the drugs now? What's being tried at the moment?
At the moment, we've got colchicine, which is a drug that has been used in gout and inflammatory heart conditions that they think may have some anti-inflammatory properties that would be beneficial for people's lung injuries, basically. Regeneron, which is a combination of what are called monoclonal antibodies or synthetic neutralizing antibodies. So it's an IV drug. They're trialing aspirin, which we think might have some benefit in stopping patients developing clots in their heart and lungs, particularly baricitinib.
It is a monoclonal, but it's anti-inflammatory that's primarily used for rheumatology disorders.
I should have let you go first, you see, shouldn't I?
And then they've just stopped using, as part of the trial anyway, tocilizumab.
Yeah.
And the evidence that they've just published shows that it does have benefit on patients with the more severe end of the condition and stops them deteriorating if it's given early enough. But the note with that is if they do have tocilizumab now clinically, they can't be randomised to baricitinib. They can't have the two together.
There's Anakinra, isn't there, for children as well?
Anakinra is being used for the recovery trial in paediatric patients. It's another drug that's used to treat rheumatoid arthritis and is going to be given via a subcutaneous injection, but this is only for children. So with children, it's slightly different. They don't present with COVID-19 the same as adults do. And they present generally more with what we call PIMS TS, which is a paediatric inflammatory, which generally affects multiple organs. So the treatments from the recovery trial for paediatrics is high-dose methylprednisolone and intravenous immunoglobulins. They've now added the Anakinra in, which, like I say, is the subcutaneous injections, but they're also using baricitinib as well within children. But it's for the different types of severity, and it has to be age-related. It's very complex in peds. There's over 44 weeks gestation, there's under 12 years, there's over 12 years. And actually tocilizumab is still available for pediatrics as well. Fortunately, we haven't had many children admitted suffering with COVID-19 and PIMS TS, but we have had a few that we have successfully recruited. And the other important thing to remember about this in the recovery trial is these drugs are all compared with standard of care. So if they don't get randomised to one of the trial drugs, they might just get standard of care, which is no extra treatment.
It's just as important in terms of outcomes. And I think that's something that we find. We've often had questions about, if they get standard of care, can I start them on this, that sort of thing. But what we try and get across really strongly is that the patients who don't get a drug treatment as a control arm, they're really valuable. And I think it's worth saying that to patients as well, that coming into the study, regardless of what treatment they get, has real value for everybody who might get COVID in the future, because we need those people to measure the effectiveness of the drugs against.
As part of the recovery trial, they have tried lots of other different types of therapies that have proven to not be of benefit as well. So that's just as important as finding the drugs that are of benefit. So one of those was plasma which was donated from people who had got antibodies against COVID-19. So it was seen if we could increase systemic antibodies, which would help the patients recover from their infection. But that was shown to be not of benefit. So it's just as important that we have a negative response to the drugs as we do a positive response to the drugs.
I was really amazed how quickly that was done as well, wasn't it? It seemed like one day we weren't giving people much plasma at all, and then the next day we were almost giving it to everybody. I think it happened over the period when we were really busy around Christmas as well, and Like, we literally couldn't get convalescent plasma out to people quickly enough. And then
I think it was stopped very quickly as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
And it was
stopped.
found not to have any benefit. It was just don't give any more.
And that shows the power of numbers. You know, the more patients we get in quicker, the quicker you can find this stuff out. And it was really obvious that when you've got the patients coming in, getting onto the drugs quickly, you get the answers in no time at all. You know, it was a matter of months, wasn't it, really?
And then the other group that we do recruit to within the recovery trial is pregnant women. So it really is quite an inclusive trial. The only difference with that is they don't recommend colchicine or baricitinib if you're pregnant. Colchicine shouldn't be given for patients that are receiving a statin. So something like simvastatin, atravastin. If they're on a statin, they can either have that stopped temporarily while they're randomised to colchicine, or we can remove that arm and not randomise the patient.
There's been 600 patients, hasn't there? What are we expecting really from the teams on the wards on this trial?
We asked quite a lot of them, to be honest. The main thing that the recovery trial needs of the doctors on the wards, the clinicians, is a good thorough review of their patient to tell us which drugs are suitable for their patients, so which drugs we can include in the randomization process, essentially. Lots of that we, as nurses, are very good at doing, and we can really guide them on that. But we don't know their patients in the same way that they do. And if that is included as part of their clinical reviews when they see their patients, it's really valuable, because then they, if they've considered all the drug arms alongside their medical examination, then there's really nothing else that we can ask of them. That's perfect.
We just need them on board to do the thorough investigations of the patient. As nurses, we do tend to look at, the inclusion exclusion criteria, but sometimes it might get missed, and we need them to sign the eligibility form as well.
The only other thing I would ask is that there is a large proportion of patients that are actually ineligible for the trial because they aren't demonstrating symptoms, because they've been admitted for something else, and their COVID-19 diagnosis is a added extra. So for those patients that are asymptomatic at the time they're reviewed by us, if they develop symptoms and the clinicians or the nursing team think they would be eligible for recovery, then they can refer directly to the team.
And that's really hard to predict, isn't it? We find that, a lot of patients you'll go and see and they're not showing any signs and symptoms. Sometimes that it's been picked up incidentally if they're in hospital for other things. You can't predict which ones of those are going to go home and be absolutely fine, and which ones in 2 days' time are going to be seriously unwell from coronavirus. So it is really important that the clinical teams know that they can contact us when their patients are becoming ill, because we can't see the patients when we're not on the wards. So we've tried really hard to be available and have our telephone numbers widely available.
We've got a referral process that now can be done through Nerve Centre. So that can be done by a clinician or a nurse. It's like a little slider within Nerve Centre that says refer to research, and that will automatically bring the patients to us. Or they can call us and we can go and help them on the ward and support them and discuss the trial in depth and see what options there is for their patients on the recovery trial.
We've got a baton phone for people to contact the recovery team at City, and a baton phone for clinicians to contact the recovery team at Queen's. So
the City COVID team phone number is 07812 268 605.
Okay, for the COVID team at Queen's Medical Centre, the telephone number is 0812 268 761, and there's somebody from the team that will always pick that up, and if they're not available, there's a voicemail on it.
I think just being present on the wards has been very useful to the doctors to know what treatments are coming up and what treatments are available, and it does give them, confidence that we are learning more about treating coronavirus, and that we are making some improvements to what can be done for those patients. We've become quite little walking libraries of information. We all go around with big files of all the information on the study. So if you come and approach one of us, even if we don't know it straight away, we can usually find the answer pretty quickly.
Just going to say about the recovery trial website. It's accessible for anybody. Anybody can access that by doing a Google search for recovery trial, or the web address is recoverytrial.net.
Yeah, and anybody can go on that, can't they? Patients and doctors, nurses, anybody. It's got a load of information on there, and that's where they tend to release their statements about how different drug arms are doing as well. So if you see something come up on the BBC, that you've usually got a statement made on the recovery website first.
Quite useful for pointing family members to it as well, because sometimes the patient won't always remember, and they'll ask us to contact their family to let them know what's happening. But it's quite useful to direct the family to the recovery website, because that is the most up-to-date information for them.
I was going to say as well, in terms of what research can do to help, one of the things that we have been asked to do just in this last week is to help with publish Public Health England surveillance of patients that get a COVID diagnosis after having their vaccine. So we're just starting to do that in the hospital at the moment. And what we're doing is helping to get samples from those patients and send them off to the Public Health England labs, along with we'll be asking the doctors to fill in a surveillance form where that's happening. And that's very new. It's not necessarily always been traditionally a research role. And it's something that we're happy to help with, because we're finding those patients, we're screening those patients on a daily basis. So we'll find them very easily, I hope.
What would you like to say to teams out there working 7 days a week on recovery?
Well, without the staff, the delivery staff working on the recovery trial and working flexibly, which is something that we haven't really done in R&I, so covering 7 days a week, the staff have just flown with it. They've just done it. They've done what we've asked for them. And without them, we wouldn't have these new treatments for coronavirus, as Jack's already mentioned. So everybody that's working on the recovery trial or has previously worked on the recovery trial, it's all down to them. They've done all the hard work.
Just echo what Becky said. Without the staff, the recovery trial wouldn't be the success it is today, and more patients would have lost their lives. So just a massive, massive thank you really to everybody that's done everything that they have so far to make a difference for our patients.
The recovery trial isn't just the research staff doing it, it's everybody in the process. And what I've been amazed with is how keen patients are to interact and talk with us, sometimes when they're feeling absolutely rotten, and really give it a lot of thought. Patients' relatives have been able to give us their opinion on what their relative would want in the absence of, where their relative can't tell us what they want to do. And that's been an amazing success on occasions where we've been able to do that for patients that can't tell us what they want. The doctors on the wards as well, just thank you for giving us your time. It can be a big chunk out of their day sometimes, particularly where there's been complicated patients who haven't been straightforward. We really appreciate them taking the time and getting these patients the treatments that we can offer them.
It's great teamwork.
It has been. I guess that's what the NHS is good at, isn't it? It's a flexible team. It gives you the framework to be able to, and the freedom to work in the ways that are best for the patients.
I'm going to be really corny now. Hashtag Team NU8. Hashtag we are research.
Hashtag cure for COVID.
Any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to say about recovery?
I think for me, the recovery trials just shows that, we're in a global pandemic, but we're still able to do research, and it's highlighted research in a way that I don't think it's ever been highlighted before. I think that's one good thing to come out of COVID.
And I think the recovery trial itself has demonstrated that you don't have to be a specific speciality to do well in research. We've got so many different members of staff from so many different areas, both research and clinical. And like we've said before, without them, the recovery trial wouldn't have been a success. But it's just demonstrated what we can actually do when we all work together.
I mentioned the doctors, but lots of the nurses have been amazing in helping us to deliver these therapies to patients as well, being a second checker or taking the time for us to explain what the drugs are and what they do and all the rest of it. That's been really vital as well to make sure that patients get what they need.
My experience as well is the nurses are really keen to help.
They're
the
really
ward
interested,
nurses.
yeah.
They're really interested in research and what we're trialling and what new drugs we've got. From a nurse's perspective, I've found they've really been on board.
#NUH is research.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
For more information on recovery, contact the research nursing team or go to the Recovery Trial website, which is recoverytrial.net. The Clinical Research Podcast is produced and presented by the Research and Innovation Department of Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust. You can find out more about our research and links to the information in this episode in the show notes.